Hello, and welcome to Agents of Nonprofit. My name is Alexander Lapa, and I'm here to speak with everyday superheroes helping nonprofits. Joining me today is Sarah Lange to talk about revolutionizing philanthropy. Sarah, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Alex. I'm really excited to be here.
So please, can you start by telling us your superhero origin story?
I love the nonprofit sector. I've been in the nonprofit sector since I left college, and I will never leave the nonprofit sector. And the reason why is because when I was a small child, I was living in upstate New York where the Iroquois and the Mohawk Indians used to live. And I dug up some arrowheads in my backyard and I went inside to ask my parents about what they were. And my parents, I'm not exactly sure what they told me, but I stood on a kitchen chair and started yelling at them that it wasn't okay that we took our house from the Indians. So in my little 4-year-old brain, I thought we had taken the house. And I was saying, that's not fair. You don't take things from people. So I think I just came into this world as a social justice warrior. And I've always been that kid who points out things that are unfair to teachers and adults. And so I think that's just my wiring. And so it was just a natural thing for me to go into the nonprofit sector to try and right the wrongs of the world.
The first thing I think of when I hear that is that it must, the challenge ahead of you is so vast. Like I'm all for it. You have my full support. Almost where do you begin? I guess you've carved out for yourself a particular niche. You have a certain way of, you built a manifesto or wrote a manifesto, I should say, talking about revolutionizing philanthropy. Maybe we start with that one because the bigger question is, if you are trying to right the wrongs, and there's a lot of wrongs, unfortunately, in the world, where do you begin? How do you pick a path? How do you pick a lane to start to say, okay, here's where I'm going to focus my attention on, and hopefully other people will fill in the gaps where I can't do myself?
Yeah, I guess the way I would frame it is, I have a global vision. So I have this very big vision about lifting humanity. And I believe that's going to happen through nonprofits because around the world, nonprofits are doing a lot of heavy lifting and really changing lives on a daily basis. So they're doing transformational work every single day. And so my belief is that nonprofits are going to be the ones who uplift humanity around the globe. And so I want to teach nonprofits my approach to fundraising because I've already raised 100 million. I'm well on my way to the next 100 million. I was just out in Washington with a client and found out they just landed a matching grant to the 250 we raised to them. So now they have $500,000 to expand their operations, which is amazing. So that's my vision. I'm just going to work with every single nonprofit that I can get my hands on, teach them my approach to fundraising, and hopefully that will help them expand and scale. And then I'll move on to the next one and the next one. And this is also why I do a lot of workshops and webinars and teaching and speaking so that I can reach people on a bigger scale.
So what would be one of the, and I know there's going to be a lot, but from your experience, from your perspective, what would be one of the challenges you see most often before you start working with a nonprofit? How do you assess maybe the situation to say, okay, you guys have these certain challenges you're struggling with, here's how I can help. And I imagine that after a certain period of time, those kinds of challenges reappear. And then so you kind of like are saying, all right, here's a map. Most likely when I'm needed, these are the challenges that I can solve, and these are the challenges that the nonprofit have.
Yeah, that's a good question. My approach is very comprehensive because I believe that pretty much every area of operations is either lifting up your fundraising or pulling it down. So over the years, I've developed a broader and broader approach. And now I have this assessment tool called the High Impact Nonprofit, where I go in and I evaluate 7 different core functions. And then we can identify if there's any dumpster fires that need to get put out. And that might be that maybe you have a match grant that you can take an opportunity of, but you don't know how to get the matching money in the door. It could be anything. So we do the assessment, we identify the most pressing issues that's facing that nonprofit at the moment. We put together a customized roadmap, which includes strategies, but it also includes training. So I have this whole high impact nonprofit curriculum that I've developed, and I will recommend which trainings I want them to take because when you're trying to change an organization, it can't just be one person. That's a very lonely, difficult job. So I look at cross training, like across the staff, across the board, so that the executive director doesn't have to feel like Goliath. So, I guess Atlas is the word I'm looking for, the character I'm looking for. So after the assessment, we'll put together a 30-day roadmap, loop back around, see how the 30 days went, what progress did they make, set our next 30 days. So we just keep doing this in periods of 6 months. And once they get the hang of how to do this process, they're going to need me less. So then I can use that process over and over and over with my team to help more and more nonprofits. So that's what we do, is because every nonprofit is in a different place in their development, in terms of fundraising, in terms of their board, in terms of their programming. So this allows us to step in and meet them where they are and help them up level and scale.
I love the fact that it's really like a training wheels type of approach. Like I can see a parental figure helping a child where they're starting to learn how to ride a bicycle. So they got the training wheels on. Then you check up on them every once in a while. Obviously, you don't need to do it every second like a parent would, but every 30 days. And then at some point, hopefully 6 months down the road, the training wheels are off. They're able to ride on their own. Teach a person how to fish versus I'll be here forever taking care of you style.
Exactly. Well, that's the only way I'm ever going to reach my goal of helping possibly millions of nonprofits. I would love to help millions of nonprofits, but if I'm in your organization, first of all, that's not building your capacity and your bandwidth, which is really what I believe in. I want to strengthen nonprofits. I want to help them expand, grow, scale so that they can raise more money and do more good in whatever their cause is. And also it allows me and my team to work with more people, more organizations around the globe.
I don't know when, I didn't actually track it, but you shared with me your manifesto, this revolutionizing philanthropy so that philanthropy can be revolutionary. What was the motivation behind the manifesto? And what were you hoping to accomplish?
I got to a point in my career where I was just tired of having the same conversations and seeing the same problems. And I am very much, when you look at the word radical, it means getting to the root of a problem. So from that definition, I'm definitely a radical. I am a problem solver. I don't want to just make the world a better place. I wanted to do it in a really powerful, meaningful way. And so I got to the point where I just felt like a broken record. And I took a step back and I looked at the industry and I could see these things that were in play that were really holding the entire industry back. And I said, that's it, I'm done. So I wrote the manifesto as kind of a foundation for people to rethink philanthropy, to rethink the way that nonprofits operate. So that was really where it came out of, a certain level of frustration and being tired of having the same conversations repeatedly.
So let's get into it. What were the challenges, like what we were able to describe in the manifesto to start changing the perspective of nonprofits? You mentioned something, for example, just to give you a bit more on that, is there was like an old rule book that most nonprofits follow, and you wish we could all chuck it away. So maybe you can explain, what does that mean, this old rule book, and what can we replace it with?
Yeah, so we in the nonprofit sector tend to operate from this 400-year-old rule book that was handed to us by the Puritans. So in the United States, when the Puritans came here, they weren't just seeking religious freedom, they were also seeking capitalist opportunities. And they were super aggressive capitalists, but they were also Calvinists. So they were taught that the road to hell is paved with money. So they created charity as a penance, right? So if you are trying to avoid going to hell for being an aggressive capitalist and you set up these charities as your penance, you don't want the charities to make any money because then you're just back in the same cauldron of soup, right? So they have all these beliefs about how charities should operate that are still in play today. So this idea that nonprofits can't make money, well, that's not true. Ask my clients, they're making lots of money. Then they have this idea that, you must keep overhead low. Well, all that does is handcuff our growth. so that we can't really scale to meet the scope of the problems and the challenges that we're here to face and resolve. So those are just a couple of things that got handed down in this rule book, which is now 400 years old. And we might want to think about updating it because I don't know any other sector that's using a 400-year-old rule book. So those are the kinds of beliefs that are kind of swimming, they're in the drinking water of the nonprofit sector. And it just is holding the whole sector back.
Yeah, and unfortunately, so many people confuse not-for-profit with no-profit, and it's such a shame. And I agree that you have to be diligent with your money. Everything has to be tracked, and the concept of we're not allowed to make a lot of it because then it would defeat the purpose of what we're trying to achieve. And yet, it's the exact opposite. To have the larger impact, you need to have money to be able to help more. So,
right.
I'm just surprised that it's still around and has been around for such a long time, and people haven't really wrapped their head around a better way to do things.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is where I feel like I can really help dislodge this old way of thinking and these beliefs because most people in the sector. So, for example, when I got into the sector, I didn't know that these beliefs were in the drinking water. They just were kind of handed to me, and I was like, okay, well, if this is the culture, this is the culture. But this is where I started to get really frustrated because I think big, I have big goals, I have a big vision. And so it was very frustrating for me when I had all these ideas about how to generate more revenue. And I was kind of getting this pushback around, well, we don't want to raise too much money. And I was scratching my head. I was like, what does that even mean? How can you raise too much money? Like, that's just mind boggling to me. And so, this is where I think that I can, because I'm, have been in the sector for a really long time, and because I know the ins and outs of the nonprofit world, that I can kind of be this new voice or help people think about this. And I just ask a lot of open-ended questions. And it's kind of fun to watch the light bulbs go on like, oh my gosh, I had no idea that this ridiculous rule book was in place. And then once people know it, then they can make a different decision about how they're going about their work. What mindset do they want to approach the work with? And so for me, it's just kind of a leverage tool or a crowbar to help people realize that we have been drinking the Kool-Aid for way too long.
Without even realizing that we are drinking the Kool-Aid. Like you said, it's more like a socially accepted norm that no one really questions or looks at too carefully because that's the way it's always been, as opposed to you coming in with a hammer and smashing things up and saying, no, hang on a second. There is a better way. Let me show you how.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is also the pressure that people get from the outside world because most people don't understand that, these nonprofits are handcuffed by this whole set of limiting beliefs. They've adopted them too. And so, I hear people saying, oh, well, their overhead is too high. And I'm like, what does that even mean? Like, I'll just share a quick story. I have a cousin with Down syndrome. She had to go to special school. There was a really high ratio of staff to students because they needed more support. My cousin has lived her fullest, best life. She has an apartment. She got married. She has a job. She keeps her plants alive. She manages her cat. She does her laundry, all the things, right? All the things that we want young people to do. She's been able to do despite having Down syndrome. Not only that, her aunt and uncle got to have a full life, right? So here's a whole family that got to live their best lives because this school helped my cousin prepare for adulthood. Who cares what the overhead at that school is? How can you put a price on independence and freedom? And that's where it blows my mind that we have some sort of moral attachment to this idea that, the organization with the lowest overhead is morally superior. So we conflate frugality with morality. And really all we're doing is hurting the people who are turning to these organizations for support.
What then, because all great points, what then would be your foot in the door to start changing their perspective on this old rule book? Because I said it must take a while sometimes, like you said, to get to a point where you're able to see the aha moment. And I imagine it's not on day one or maybe in the first minute. There's a certain progression that you need to go through to help them along to get to that moment. Could you maybe share a couple of those steps just to give us an idea of what that would be like?
Sure. So I'm sure you've seen this in your work. I have not met a single nonprofit executive who is sitting around twiddling their thumbs going, oh, yeah, I have all the money that I want. So every nonprofit is in this struggle to make the kind of money that they need to make to have the kind of impact they envision. And so my foot in the door is that I've raised over $100 million. I have clearly figured out the fundraising game. And so I can just sit down with them and say, great, let's do this analysis. Let's look at how you can become a high impact nonprofit, because we all get into the nonprofit sector because we want to make a difference. We want to have that impact. And so that's my in. I can help you raise more money so you can do more good. And then the conversation just flows from there. So I often just will ask a lot of open-ended questions as we're doing this high impact nonprofit assessment so that they can start to be aware of where their own limiting beliefs are.
How can you make how easy is it to make, let's say, a nonprofit feel okay with being profitable? Because you said earlier, and I agree that a lot of them feel that they are not allowed to, in some instances, make profit. Yeah, what messagings do you use to help them get past that fear or that concern or that fright? I'm not sure the quite right word to use here, but you know what I'm trying to say.
Well, for me, it's about tapping into their big why. Every person I know that is working in the nonprofit sector came into the sector not for the pay, that's for sure, but because they have a big heart and they want to make the world a better place. And so I just tap into their big why. Why did you get into the nonprofit sector? What is your vision for your organization? What is the best and highest good for the people who are coming to you for help or support or to be uplifted? So we all have a vision, and we tend to get so caught up in the day to day that we lose sight of that bigger vision. And for me, I do the same thing for myself. When I'm feeling overwhelmed or exhausted or frustrated or fed up, I just have to step back and tap into my own big why. Why did I get into the sector? Why is this work so important to me? And more importantly, what happens if I give up? Who gets hurt if I don't do this work? And there's so many nonprofits that are serving really crucial roles in their communities. And so I also teach people about how to take better care of themselves, how to tend to themselves in ways that work for them. For some, that might be meditation. For others, it might just be going on a walk at lunch. For others, it might be, a spa day, whatever it is that restores them. I also explore that with them so they can take care of themselves, because this is a marathon. This is not a sprint, right? As you pointed out earlier, we have a lot of problems that need to be solved in this world. And so the more uplifted our nonprofit staffers are, the more they can continue to fight the good fight.
You kind of scratched the surface of a topic about outcomes, and as opposed to expenses and how much things cost to get a certain outcome. I'm all about outcomes. It was a couple of years ago, I switched my whole mentality about how to do business, and the idea of focusing on the goals, focusing on the outcomes as opposed to the inputs, or in this case, the expenses, has been game-changing for me. I can only imagine what it must be like for a larger nonprofit that has the capability of scaling significantly more. And I'm curious to know, how do you incorporate that message into what you do?
Well, the first thing I talk about is this idea of keeping overhead low and what that costs the organization. It costs them innovation. It costs them growth. It keeps them focused on the wrong things. We're not working in the nonprofit sector to keep overhead low. We're working in the nonprofit sector to make a difference in the world. So I start to talk to them about the impact they're having, the transformation that they see, the impact they're having, not only on the people that they serve directly, but on that person's family and the community as a whole. Because none of us travel this world alone, right? So when we get uplifted, then the people around us get uplifted, and it's a ripple effect out into our community. And so looking at it that way, makes them realize, like, oh, this is why we're in business, right? We are in the business of providing food. We are in the business of uplifting people with art or music. So they are in business. And when think about it that way, what is their vision for the different world they want to see? And then reverse engineering from there, because none of us got into this business to keep overhead low. And I had a client a while ago, just to give you an example of how this works. They were working with domestic violence victims in the Boston area. And because of the way mental health counseling is billed through insurance in the United States, they were noticing that they were having a limited impact. And so they had this conversation at a staff level saying, what do we really want for the people who are coming to us for help? They're trauma survivors, and we can only get them so far down the road before we run out of insurance. Even if we can get a few extra sessions, that's really not enough to unpack the trauma. So they started having a conversation about what kind of training they would need, what kind of length of service they would need to provide, what the outcomes could be, what other services these people needed to truly get out from their situation and be independent. And that meant that their budget was going to double. And so the executive went to the board and said, this is the vision that the staff has, that we want people to leave us trauma free. And the board was like, oh, wow, that's impactful. So you don't want to just kind of leave somebody sort of healed from trauma. No, you want them to leave fully healed from trauma. And what they realized was they had to double their budget. If this was really what they wanted to achieve in the world, they had to double their budget. And so they were just unapologetic about their mission to make sure that people who came in for services and stayed for services would leave trauma free. That was their promise to their clients. And that was their promise to their community and to their funders and to their donors. And everybody just got behind it so quickly because, of course, that's what we want. We don't want human beings walking around in our community traumatized. That's not good for anybody, let alone them. So it was very easy to mobilize people around this new outcome of helping people achieve a trauma-free life. Like that's like really, to me, that's so inspirational. And I was so delighted to help them figure out that funding puzzle. And they are now offering this fuller range of services. They are having more people complete. They are curing more trauma. And it's like, it's amazing, right? That's what a nonprofit can do when they have this ability to focus on what they truly, truly want for their clients. And so many nonprofits get stuck in the position of handing out Band-Aids because they don't understand how to get the money to scale, and they're being kind of handcuffed by this whole belief system. So I love helping people unleash the fundraising puzzle to help them to, again, raise more money so they can do more good.
That is an amazing story. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah.
And it's powerful too. Like, I mean, it's so simple, but it's powerful. Like you said, there's no point even getting 80% of the way there. If you're able to, and you're capable, physically capable of helping people to the 100% full recovery, I mean, why settle for anything less? That's amazing.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Why settle for anything less? And I think that goes back to this set of limiting beliefs because nonprofits have been trained to settle for the crumbs.
There's a line in your book that caught my attention, and it's on the same topic as we're mentioning now. So it goes, spending is not the same as investing, but we rarely differentiate between the two. I was hoping you could elaborate that in the context of what we're talking about now.
Yeah, absolutely. So every business has to spend money, right? We all need staples and pens and a copier and blah, 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 right? So whether you're a for-profit or a nonprofit business, you need those infrastructure things. You need someone who's going to manage your phone calls and all that stuff. However, the only way to make more money is to invest. And if for-profit, that might be in another store opening, more equipment, bigger teams. Like I have a friend who's in construction in Colorado, and he's expanding, and that's requiring a significant amount of capital. but they project that it's going to bring in $1 billion of new business, right? So in the nonprofit sector, we've been brainwashed that all spending is bad. So we have this equation in our head, spending is bad. But what we don't realize is there's a difference between spending, which to me is just one-time costs or things like staff salaries, insurance, those things are ongoing expenses. But if you want to increase your fundraising, the only way to do that is by investing in fundraising. And I'm not just talking about increasing your staff capacity, although that's a great place to start, but also looking at the systems and the processes and the structures and things like your grant writing program, the role that your board of directors is playing in fundraising, whether you are really working to retain your donors and grow that program. So you have to invest. You have to invest in the people to do the work. You have to invest in the training to make sure that they're up to date on best practices. You have to invest in good software. And you know all about that, Alex, about how important a good software program is to fundraising. So it's about infrastructure investment, but also in staff investment. And when you don't make those investments, your fundraising will either stagnate, go down, or it's certainly not going to grow. And this is why so many nonprofits find themselves in a position where they struggle to make ends meet every year because they're not making that investment in fundraising. So you have to do that if you want to make more money.
So the way that I typically hear the word investing is that there's a certain return on your investment, an ROI. Like a car is not an investment because there's a depreciating asset versus a house is an investment because it appreciates. There's a return on your investment. Would you say the same applies here? Because I believe you mentioned salary. Is it a spending or is it investment?
Well, I'm talking about staffing for your fundraising department, specifically when I'm talking about investing. So what I have found after having worked with 200 nonprofits and just having seen the sector as a whole is that most nonprofits are actually under investing in fundraising, including when it comes to staff. And the thing is, there's more fundraising jobs right now than fundraising professionals because so many boomers have moved out of the workforce. So it's really a fundraiser's market right now. And there are people who will leave a job for a higher salary because sometimes the pay is abysmal. And sometimes they just get frustrated by banging into a brick wall. So, for example, I actually left the nonprofit sector as an employee because of those frustrations. I wanted to play on a bigger field, I wanted to make a bigger impact. And so there are fundraisers out there who do move to another organization for a better opportunity, even if that's that they have more room to breathe and grow. But most nonprofits are underinvested in fundraising, and so they can't make the return on their investment. So, for example, I'll just give you a really simple example. I worked with a very well-known influencer who raises money, and they have 86,000 people in an Excel spreadsheet. So if 86,000, right? Did your head just explode? Because mine did. So, when I explored this with them and I said, well, why don't you have like a CRM or a donor database? They were like, oh, that's a lot of work and that's really expensive. And I said, what's more expensive, spending the time going back through 86,000 entries in an Excel database or actually loading it up into a CRM where you can generate reports with very little effort? And so they are now getting their first CRM, but those are the kinds of investments that it's really important to make because it's going to make your job easier. It's going to make it more efficient. You're going to be more effective in terms of your ROI and your fundraising. One of the first things I always do with my clients is a donor data dump because I want to look at who's in your database and where are you leaving money on the table? Because what I found is every single nonprofit is leaving money on the table. It's just a matter of how much. So that's why these investments are important because it can help you be more efficient, more effective, and get a higher ROI on your time and energy.
Yeah, we're aligned on that then, because the fundraising team is the team, of course, that goes out and gets money. So there is an ROI on that. You can measure it. The more people and the more qualified people you put in those positions, the more fundraising you are going to have. So that is definitely an investment, and a worthy one at that.
Yeah, absolutely. The other piece of it is that when you handcuff your fundraising team, you're handcuffing the entire organization. So if you're telling them, oh, you can't do this because it's too expensive, or you can't do that, but it's a best practice and there's so much research that shows you what your actual return on the investment. So there's a woman out of Canada named Penelope Burke, and she does all this work around donor center fundraising, but she does research. It's not just whimsy. She actually crunches the data and will tell you, what do donors want? How do you build a donor-centric organization? And so when you prevent your team from getting the tools they need, or you handcuff them in different ways, they can't raise more money because now you've put a brick wall between them and the goal you're pushing them to reach. And so one of the things that I really would encourage people to do is it's not just about the money. Obviously, the more money we have, the more we can do to fulfill our mission. And we need to look at the fundraising staff investment in relationships. Relationships take time and energy, and there's only so many donors you can date at the same time. And this is why you need a team. This is why you need your board involved, because donors give about 78% of all the philanthropic money in the United States. And in 2022, that was $499.33 billion. So if you don't invest in relationships with your donors, they're going to walk away, which is a lost opportunity. But if you invest in donors, what Penelope has found is that they have a 39% increased lifetime value as a donor.
Yeah, data-driven.
Yeah, data-driven, right.
Decisions are amazing. The more data you have, the better decisions you can make. It's such a simple formula.
Yeah, exactly. I am a data nerd. I love looking at who's in your database. I love looking at your retention rates. I love looking at your acquisition rates because it tells me everything I need to know. If you have a lousy retention rate, the first thing I'm going to go look at is your communications program. I'm also going to look at your donor stewardship and cultivation program. And what I find is a lot of organizations have not charted out the donor journey. So they just are so worried about getting the money in the door. They don't think about what's next for that donor. And 50% of first-time donors are going to walk away before their second gift. That's a huge lost opportunity cost. And this is what I'm talking about, nonprofits leaving money on the table.
And knowing these numbers can definitely help move nonprofits in the right direction to not be part of that statistic, to be able to reap the benefits of those numbers and be on the other side to get longer term, bigger donors as a result.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of very simple, small things that these nonprofits can do to tweak their efforts. So it's not taking on a whole new load of work, but I will start by looking at what they're already doing and how do we take those approaches and tweak them to make them more efficient, more effective. So for example, looking at your communications program. Okay, what does your email look like? What does your newsletter look like? What do your social media stories look like? And sometimes it's just a matter of tweaking the content to be more engaging, to be more relationship focused so that people feel more deeply connected. Because here's the thing about philanthropy. Philanthropy is a heart-centered activity. So gifts are made from donors from their hearts because the issue that you are addressing affects them deeply. So they care about your cause. And because they can't necessarily do anything about it. So for example, I have a dear friend, lost her mother to cancer. Obviously, she's not a microbiologist who's going to find the cure, but she wants a cure to be available at some point or better treatments to be available. So she supports cancer organizations, right? And that's where we miss the cue sometimes, is that this is a heart-centered gift. Okay, well, I am trying to have a relationship with the people that your organization helps. Through my donation, I'm trying to make a difference for them. So I'm trying to have a relationship with you. And if you treat me like an ATM or treat my donation as a transaction, I'm going to walk away. That's the number one reason people leave, is because I feel my gift doesn't matter.
Mm.
So there's a lot you can do to like sustain relationships. And given that, Valentine's Day just happened, there is a whole series of things you can do that aren't that hard or complicated or expensive, that allow your donors to know that they do matter and they are making a difference in your mission. And obviously the staff and the board play a very important role, but from the donor's perspective, you need to let them be the hero of the story, because that's what they're trying to do.
It's evident that you're very passionate about this and you've got a lot of experience behind you. So I'm hoping you could share with the listeners where they could read your manifesto and maybe get in touch with you online.
Yeah, so my manifesto is on my website, and my website is www.sarah, S-A-R-A-H, B as in boy, Lange, Lange.com.
Sarah, this has been great. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, I really appreciate that you had me, and this was really fun.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very thankful that you're doing this hard work, that you're teaching nonprofits the better way, and I really hope for your long-term success.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, that's it for today. I'm Alexander Lapa, and I hope you join me again in the next Agents of Nonprofit.